Welcome to another episode of the Untangling Web3 podcast. Today, we're incredibly excited to be joined by Justin Gary, a truly distinguished figure in the gaming industry and CEO of Stoneblade Entertainment. If you don't know him already, Justin is the design guru behind both the World of Warcraft miniatures and the Marvel vs. DC trading card games, along with many, many more. With 20 years of game industry experience behind him, Justin is now forging a new path into Web3 with his new game, Solforge Fusion. Co created with Richard Garfield, the legendary designer of Magic the Gathering, Solforge is pioneering a new approach to unique deck building card games backed by the Solana blockchain. So, without further ado, let's find out more from the man himself. Welcome to the show, Justin.
Really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
The pleasure's all ours, Justin. We've been really looking forward to this for a long time. How are you, though, first and foremost?
I'm doing great. I'm actually down here in Medellin, Colombia. I've been doing the digital nomad thing for a while. Only got another couple days here, but it's been wonderful. The weather's been great, and get to launch really cool projects. So it's been fun.
Yeah, you're really rubbing it in there. Jack and I are based in London, so we look at a window and it's not so fun. Let's kick it off. So we typically don't go into people's backgrounds because I don't know, people tend to just want the meat of the episode. They want to learn things. They want to find out, what the topic at hand is. But I've got an interest in gaming. Like, I used to be a huge Yu-Gi-Oh fan, collectibles fan. Used to be very into World of Warcraft. So when I was looking at your background, doing my research, listening to the Tim Ferriss episode, I was like, God, we have to really go into this guy's like origin story effectively. And you've got the classic story, philosophy major, you know, Magic the Gathering world champ, and you went to law school, and then eventually you got into the world design. You know, it's the classic kind of orthodox character arc. But before we get into all this stuff, could you talk a little bit about that? Like, I really want to know like how that happened, what motivated you to move into the world of game design?
Yeah. So you kind of hit some of the highlights, but really for me, I was always passionate about games. My family would get together and we'd play cutthroat games of Monopoly around the kitchen table, all the way up till discovering Dungeons and Dragons and playing that with my friends when I was in my early 13, 14 years old, and then discovering Magic when I was 16. And I just took to it right away. I mean, it was something that I was just so amazed that there was this game that you could play, but also that you could kind of create and design as you played, right? Every single new pack you opened was this magical discovery moment. And then you could build and craft decks that fit your personality and then discover new things when you played against other people. And I basically slept, dreamt in Magic. And within a year of discovering it, I became the youngest ever US national champion. And so it became all of a sudden, this is like a real thing. I started traveling around the world and playing tournaments in Rome and Tokyo. And I mean, I'm still in high school while this is happening. Right. And so now all of a sudden I make enough money to pay my way through college. I stopped, flipping burgers and working at the little local deli. I was really was very transformative. And so it was this thing I'm so grateful for. I got to make friendships that I still have to this day. And but for whatever reason, I still did not see it as a career, right? I still did not see it as something that was like a life's forever thing. It was just I was playing games and I was having fun, and that's where the law school part comes in, right? And this is, my parents were both lawyers. It was always like, okay, yeah, you go play your silly games, that's fine, but you're a lawyer, you're going to be a lawyer. And it took me a year of law school at NYU Law, where the weather was not as nice as it is here in in Medellin, and I remember, I started that not only was I just like miserable, but I was so unhealthy. My body was rebelling against me. I've just told the story before where I literally threw my back out from reading, like literally just in the library, get up, throw my back out. I'm out of commission for 2 weeks. And thank God at some point that summer, because of my Magic career, I got the opportunity that some friends who I had known from that time invited me to come when we were working on the original Versus System trading card game, that Marvel and DC trading card game that summer. So instead of working in a law firm, I went to San Diego and got to go work on games and just really came alive again and really felt that passion for design. And it was something that, by the way, I had to like learn the hard way, because designing games is very, very different than being good at playing games. Being good at playing games is one certain kind of skill. Figuring out how you design games and how you craft an experience for people, totally different skill. So I was thrown into the deep end, but I really loved it. I spent all of the time I could studying, asking questions of designers, people I knew. Eventually, I was able to learn enough and launch projects there. I turned that into my book called Think Like a Game Designer and launched my own company. About 5 years later, we launched our deck building game Ascension. And then there's another part of the story, which is how Solforge gets started. But I'll pause there because I feel like I've been rambling a little bit. But it's been an interesting journey for sure.
No, don't worry. We're going to get onto Solforge and everything that
Yeah.
came after all this stuff. But I think, yeah, on all my kind of like, the little bit of research I've done on you, the big decision point seemed like you were when you were in law school, and that was going to be the future, right? The stable future. And all of a sudden you were thrown into the game design world as an intern, and you didn't have the experience. The classic kind of imposter syndrome, I imagine, became apparent. But you had the passion for it. And I think that is so important, even though you didn't have the expertise. And what's already coming through, and I imagine will continue to come through this episode, is the passion for the thing you're doing. And passion is more important in my mind than almost anything else. And yeah, I think that's something that's going to become apparent in the rest of the episode, hopefully.
Yeah, that's right. Like my passion drives me. It's my sort of my values in life. It's love, wisdom, and courage. Right. And this love is representing being love of what you do, being really passionate about what's going on. This wisdom in saying, look, I'm trying to get better. Right. I've made a lot of stupid mistakes, and I'm sure I will make many more. And I'm trying to learn from those things as I iterate. And then the courage part is the thing that really, I think a lot of people misunderstand, because that fear that I felt when I left law school. I mean, remember, this is the kind of thing that like I was destined to do since I was born. I didn't know what the path was like on the other side. I knew that my family was going to be disappointed. I was leaving this like safe, steady path. But in reality, what I was afraid of was all illusory, right? If I wanted to, I could have gone back to law school the next year, right? I would have lost at most a year of my progress, and that's all that was really at stake. Maybe a little bit of embarrassment, but on the other side, there's a different kind of fear, and that fear is never taking your shot, never trying to follow your dreams, never trying to live your passion. And if I went through and 50 years from now, I was looking back and saying, "Oh well, this is it. I never even got to see if I could have succeeded. I never got to see if I could do that." That's what you should really be afraid of. And so learning to really channel your fear in the right way is a really important part of why I'm here where I am and willing to take the risks that I do, because each piece of it is like, okay, well, how would I feel if I didn't do that thing? How would I feel if I didn't push that boundary, whether that be with, leaving law school or quitting my dream job as a game designer to start my own company, or jumping feet first into Web3, or all the different pieces of it, right? Each one of them is something where I'm like, all right, I'm going to face the fears of potential failure, of embarrassment, of whatever, because if what's more important to me is that I push those boundaries and do what I'm excited about and passionate about.
Yeah, that's really inspiring. And what's the phrase that comes to mind? Like you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right? So I think if there's an industry where you have the shot takers, it's probably Web3 and people who are actually putting themselves out there. But before we do jump into all the Web3 side of things, I want to take a moment to pause and just kind of lay the groundwork for what are these deck building games exactly, because we've talked a lot about gaming on the show in the past. We talked about mostly in the video game sphere. And I think this is really interesting. So when you say deck building, I think of something like Yu-Gi-Oh! As Alec mentioned. I remember going and buying packs at the local corner shop every week and begging to buy a new pack. And that's what comes to mind. But for the uninitiated, people who don't know what these games are, what they're all about, can you just give us a really brief 101 to, what are these kind of games and why people love them?
Yeah, I'd love to. So we'll distinguish a couple different terms here, because deck building is part of it, but there's one that speaks to a specific genre of game. So there's trading card games and collectible card games. Those terms are used interchangeably, and then deck building games, which are slightly different, and I'll explain what both are. So a trading card game is a game where all of the cards are not the same for each player. So typically speaking, you will buy random packs of cards. You buy baseball cards or any other collectible, right? And you open up those packs of cards, and based on the cards that you have versus the cards that your opponent has, you'll build a deck of cards that you construct. You will build a deck, and then you'll play that against other people, and different rules about which cards you're allowed to use or play with. That's kind of, can vary from game to game, but the basic idea is my collection of cards is different than your collection of cards, and I build a deck out of my collection and you build a deck out of your collection. Magic the Gathering was the very first of those games, and that was started the whole genre, and other games like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon and others kind of followed suit with the same formula, slightly different rules, but the basic idea is that the whole game is not contained in one box, and not everybody has the exact same collection. And so there's this fun of collecting and rarity and chasing after this cool card you want. There's the fun of the creativity and the building part of like, what kind of deck do I want? And then there's just the core of the game experience, the fun that you have of just playing a strategic game. What I like to describe it for those that are uninitiated is, imagine if you had a game that was like cross between chess and poker, but you got to decide what your starting cards and starting pieces were. And give you a close approximation of what a trading card game is. Now, a deck building game is slightly different. A deck building game is actually the game I'm probably most well known for, called Ascension, is a deck building game. And the whole game is the process of building a deck. So imagine if instead of like a game like Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh, where I'll collect cards from buying packs and you'll collect cards from buying packs, we'll build our decks before we start playing, and then we'll start playing. A deck building game is we all start with the exact same deck of cards, and we actually acquire cards during a game. So instead of having to buy packs and packs of cards, I would just buy one box of things. So Ascension you could download for free and play for free, or you buy one $40 box if you want the tabletop version. And the game itself is a game of building your deck. And so that's kind of a genre that evolved out of the trading card game world. It appeals to the same sort of audience, but it's not exactly the same. And you'll see when we get to it why Solforge Fusion, Richard Garfield, the creator of Magic, and me, the creator of Ascension, have created what we call a hybrid deck game, which sort of takes the best of both worlds in ways that we can talk about later.
I mean, that's really exciting. Like, I'm already starting to see the overlap between these style of games moving into the digital world and how NFTs can start to empower that. But like we said with Jack, before we get on to Web3, blockchain, all this kind of stuff, what can you kind of highlight from traditional gaming, both physical and digital, when it comes to these deck building games? What kind of issues do we see in the traditional sense of these games?
Yeah, so at its core, right, the fun, there's a phrase I really love. It's your greatest strength is also your greatest weakness, and that's true in a lot of these game categories. You have to understand your business model, and the system that you build around it dictates the fun of the game, and it also dictates a lot of the problems that you're going to have. So for example, in a game like Magic the Gathering, it's really fun and cool to be opening up packs of cards and collecting super rare cards and having an opponent that sees a card that you've never seen before or plays a card you've never seen before. But on the flip side, some of the problems are like, okay, well, if the cards are super rare and hard to chase, then it can be very expensive to play. If you played Yu-Gi-Oh at all, you had to chase after some of those expensive cards. I mean, nowadays, some of the most expensive Magic cards are worth millions of dollars. It's kind of wild, right? And that's one kind of cool thing, because it can be cool collectibles, but also can be a problem if people want to kind of play and compete and get into it. In addition, there's been an interesting phenomenon over the years. When I started playing, to date myself a little bit here, it was the early days of the internet, right? So you could actually still open up packs of cards and never have seen that card before in your life. Nowadays, the spoilers are out before the sets are even released. Everybody knows everybody else's cards. And in fact, generally speaking, the strategies are all broken down beforehand. Like, the best players will have the best decks, and you'll basically consolidate around maybe 3 or 4 decks if the environment's healthy, like that everybody plays the same strategy with a few variations, and so everybody's just copying everybody else. Whereas in my day, I mean, when I won my US national championships, I just had my homebrew deck. That was my custom deck that I just brought to the tournament and won, but nobody had ever seen it before, because that's very, very rare nowadays. So that's kind of one of the challenges, is finding that balance between collectability and innovation and discovery, and the kind of hive mind, and making the game accessible and helping to support players who don't necessarily want to spend tons of money, making it fun for everybody at each level of the process. And deck building games were one of the attempts to solve that, because it's a complete boxed game. Everybody's on the same equal footing, but once you've played it a few times, you already know everything that's in the box, so you don't have that same sense of discovery and openness. And so there's some positives and negatives to both. So that kind of just lays the groundwork a little bit about what as a designer, I think about when I'm working on these kinds of games.
Yeah, that's super interesting that, essentially the information age, right? The web 1 and web 2, whatever you want to call it, kind of changed the nature of these games and how you approach them, right? You're saying that being able to know what the best cards are, there's no spoilers anymore. People can analyze decks, even people, I know people watch videos of tournaments of these kind of things as well, to kind of learn about the strategies and things. So there was obviously a shift when the internet itself started. So we're now talking about the next phase of that evolution, right? So what is the impact of Web3 for these things? Now, there's one trivial link that we should at least acknowledge, right? Because with a link with Magic the Gathering, so people may have heard of Mt. Gox, the exchange. That's the exchange that went bust, and the guy originally had built it to trade Magic the Gathering trading cards, right? So that's one kind of trivial link. And for some people, that'll be all they know about where the two worlds intersect. So where for you do you see them intersecting in a meaningful way, right? From a technology perspective, why do you think they can complement each other?
All right. So there's a lot of layers to this answer, but I'm going to give you the basic one, right? Which is, at its core, there is no better game system in the world to cross over and show the value of Web3 than a trading card game and its variations. Because in a traditional game, you own like I have a box of Monopoly at home, right? Trying to turn the car or the the top hat into an NFT is ridiculous. Like, why are we doing this? Like, it's just a game. I play the game. It's not collectible. It's its own thing. But for a trading card game, I'm already used to the idea that I own cards you don't, that I could sell those cards to you, trade those cards to you, that we would have collections matter. And the process of collecting and the process of ownership is an important part of the fun of the game. It's intrinsic to it. And so I can hand you a card that you can play, or I could lend you a deck to play, and you might trade cards with me, and that's part of the fun. To be able to do that digitally makes perfect sense. And what's happened over time, and again, this evolved as the internet evolved, is that the big players, right, Magic Arena and Hearthstone and other games, they force you to play in a walled garden. They don't let you trade. They don't let you get things out of your account. Like, they are controlling everything and keeping it in. And that has prevented players from doing what's perfectly natural for these games, which is to be able to trade and sell and collect and really own your collection. So that's like at the most baseline level. It's one of the reasons why Web3 was an obvious next step for trading card games and an obvious value add, because my collection has value. I should be able, as the player, to unlock and control that value, not the creator of the game. It should be, there's a lot more layers, but that's the fundamental one I think everybody can follow, that's like a key part of the process.
Yeah, I definitely get the trading card games and having basically these unique, it's basically NFTs, right, to represent uniqueness in the digital space. Like, I remember in the early Yu-Gi-Oh days, going to nerd out a little bit here, collecting the God cards and having like these versions of the God cards and having no real way to know that they were authentic and having no real way to prove to anyone else that they were authentic when I actually used them. I think one of them was fake in the end, and it's been at £50 when I was like 16 years old, which is a lot of money, right? And then being able to translate that authenticity, and now I have no idea where those cards are, and I couldn't get them back. Obviously, they were just printed and they're there for some reason. So that's a really obvious use case in relation to trading card games. Can you, like, I don't really understand the connection right now to deck building games. So how can Web3 empower the deck building game side as well?
Yeah, so in this world, I think the pure boxed deck building game, I don't think right now has a lot of value for Web3 at a baseline. But now we got to start talking a little bit about Solforge Fusion, because Solforge Fusion is trying to find somewhere in between, right? And so to give now a little bit of the history and the backstory so we can understand why we're here and why I think this is so important. When I mentioned I started my company, I launched the deck building game Ascension, right? And then I got a chance to go to a developer conference called PAX Dev, and Richard Garfield, creator of Magic the Gathering, was giving a talk. So of course I'm going to go to see the talk from the master, right? This is I'm going to learn from the master here. And at the end of the talk, somebody asks a question, says, "What's your favorite game right now?" And Richard says, "Ascension, my game." And I just lose. I mean, I literally jump up like a kid and just like, woohoo, in the back of the audience, and like the whole room laughs, right? But it gives me that opportunity to start talking to Richard, and we end up chatting after his talk, and we go for about 3 hours of talking about what we want to design next. Now, this is back in 2011, and that was the original, what we created then was the original version of Solforge, which was a perfect combination of trading card games and deck building games. And the basics are, you build your deck of cards, and then every time you play a card, you level up that card. That leveled up card goes to your discard pile, and then you shuffle your deck every couple of turns. And now you get access to your higher level cards. So you're actually building your deck as you play, but you've got some pre-building done like you would a trading card game. You're building deck as you play like a deck building game. And that became the original version of Solforge. Then that was the first game to come, a trading card game ever designed for mobile, designed for web, like built from the ground up to be a digital trading card game. We took the best of what we knew from the physical world and brought it into the digital world. Now, Solforge Fusion, I wanted to do the exact same thing with Web3 designs. And so what we've done is we've created what I previously mentioned called a hybrid deck game, where we actually algorithmically generate each deck of cards. So they are 100% unique. No two people will ever have the same deck, right? So when I talked about the problems of a trading card game, the problems of design, one of them is, okay, you've seen every card because you've seen the spoiler, right? And generally speaking, you're just going to copy whatever strategy other people have. Well, that's not possible in Solforge Fusion, because every deck is one of a kind. You can shuffle any two different decks together to play, so you still customize, but you can't copy. And so now each deck is its own NFT. Each deck is its own one-of-one collectible that you can now trade, sell, buy. You can follow its progress as that deck wins tournaments. It gets leveled up. It gets extra status. When you compete in our storyline tournaments, you can actually influence the lore of the world, and that story will get custom tagged to that deck. So the deck evolves, the NFT of it evolves, and you can now trade, sell, and collect that. And so we've taken what I felt like was some of the coolest parts of the deck building game genre and the coolest parts of the trading card game genre, and now created this hybrid model that now of course, benefits. We have our own token, which allows you to mint the NFTs. The NFTs themselves are all unique and track this data. And so now we've been able to really evolve the genre and take the best of the tabletop gaming world and bring it to Web3 and kind of cross-pollinate.
That's epic. So you're effectively creating like a digital passport of these decks as they're kind of upgrading, progressing, all this kind of stuff to create like the entire history that's authenticated, verifiable. That is so epic. One of the things that I saw when I looked into Solforge as well was the concept of decentralized governance. There's a lot of buzzwordy stuff around DAOs, how DAOs can be implemented. Like, are they actually decentralized? Is there single points of failure? Could you talk a little bit about like how it works basically in Solforge right now, the decentralized governance aspect?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a kind of white paper Git book that's up that describes all this stuff, which hopefully we can link to for those that want to go deeper into this, right? But we're rolling this thing out in phases. And in my mind, there is a great place for community governance, and there's a great place for expert, kind of expertise leadership, right? And so I believe that we have the largest portion of our token pool. I think it's like 33% or something of our token pool is community controlled. And what that means is that the community will be able to vote and make decisions about what kinds of tournaments do we create? How do we dole out rewards? What kinds of streamers and partner rewards do we want to do, right? That's the kind of thing that absolutely should be community controlled. And I'll give you an example, right? So in Magic the Gathering, right, there's the most popular format right now is called Commander. And it's a format that was actually invented by fans and played by fans. And Wizards of the Coast, the main company that makes Magic, was resistant to it forever. They stopped. They wouldn't run tournaments for it. They wouldn't design cards for it. They wouldn't reward it. And it took like years and years of groundswell of support and forcing the issue before Wizards was finally like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess we'll have those kinds of tournaments. I guess we will support that large community. And what should happen is the community should get to decide those things. And so that's where the community governance should live. And that's what we want to be transferring community governance over the course of the next year and a half, to be able to have that fully controlled by our players and have representatives who are token holders, have representatives who are tournament players, have representatives who are the casual players and streamers, and make sure that each piece has a voice in the way that the future of the game evolves. Now, I differentiate that from things like game design decisions, because I've been doing this a long time, and Richard's been doing it even longer than me. And the truth is that most people think they know what they want from a game design. And if you gave them exactly what they want, the game would be terrible, right? People want, they want to be able to not ever run out of mana in Magic and have a perfect set of cards. You want to be able to always draw the best cards you have. You want to remove variance. People say this stuff all the time, but that variance and those frustrations are in fact some of the best parts of the game, because you have to overcome the challenges and play with it. So the game design portion, I believe, should still be controlled by professional designers who are trained to do that. But the community growth and how the future development of that is done should be controlled by the players. And that's the intent, is that we will use the Web3 technology to help hand that off and allow for global governments from our player base.
It kind of brings to mind what Plato said about democracy. And if you give like every vote to every person in the exact same way, like they're going to vote for unlimited food and all food will be gone in like a day, basically. So I do understand that. But I also want to double click on the point around, feeding the community. The community is what is the driving force. Like, community-based content and user-based content is so good because, like we said earlier, it's all about love and passion. They have love and passion, absolute droves. So to empower them and give them, the tools to basically grow that individually in this decentralized way is such a powerful aspect of what I imagine you're doing. One thing I want to just ask about there is, so I know you're based on the Solana blockchain, but you were talking about token issuance and like growth within the network and all this kind of stuff. So do you have like a native token that's specifically for Solforge that's based on Solana? Is it separate? Is it like a colored token type thing?
That's correct. Yeah, we have a Solforge token that we have airdropped to our community, and in fact, most Solana holders, I forget what the number is, but there's a massive number of Solana holders are eligible for the airdrop. A massive number of players of other Web3 games like Axie Infinity and Parallels and a bunch of others are all eligible for the airdrop. So if you go to solforgefusion.com, you can click on the claim airdrop link there and see if you're eligible for it. And our goal is that everyone, we're not selling these tokens. We're not like trying to monetize that process. We're just trying to get people to come and participate in the economy, come and participate in the game. The game is totally free to play and available now. This is another big distinction between us and most games in Web3. Let's be honest. We are not vaporware. You can play us right now on Mac and PC, on Steam, totally for free. We have everything that's there, and great gameplay was first, right? So we just launched it in early access back in April. We are now launched our Web3 token, if really at the beginning of September, and the NFT functionality and trading functionality. But we had to make sure that the game was great, and then we just distribute the Web3 to get Web3 people excited and participating. And then we believe very much that will be the kind of key to not just our growth in, because again, this game exists as a physical tabletop game. It exists as a Web2 game for people that don't want to pay attention to Web3. And as of just now, it is now available as a Web3 game, and all of those things connect together.
I think that's so important, just touching on the fact that you said, it's not vaporware, because in Web3 games, we see that so often. People put the cart before the horse. They say, I want to make a Web3 game because I want to do something with tokens. I want to do something with NFTs. I like the Web3 side. And then they completely forget to design a fun game around this. We've seen this time and time again with kind of bogus games coming out, whether or not they mean to, or, it's actually intentional. That's a big problem, right? And then if you're bringing, because I wanted to touch on the community cross-pollination aspect, because I think you mentioned Solforge was a game in its own right before it became Solforge Fusion, right? So you had a community of players in the existing game. So what's it been like, that process, taking a player base from the Web 2 or the physical world into Web 3, and then cross-pollinating further across other parts of Web 3? You have people following Solana, people might be coming in from different chains, that kind of thing. Like, what's that been like?
Yeah, so it's been a very interesting. I certainly did not choose the easiest path for my career here. So to give the backstory, so we had the original version of Solforge was the first ever native, purely digital Web 2 kind of game experience that ran for about 5 years, and then we kind of had to sunset it. We brought Solforge Fusion back. And we just launched the physical version of the game. So it was a physically, algorithmically, digitally printed cards that you could play in October of 2022. And so that we sold, we had massive global launch. We had people playing all over the world. We've ended up selling about 1 million decks. And every single one of those decks had a QR code that could scan into your online account, which at the time didn't do much of anything. But once we launched the Web 2 account, the Web 2 game in April, now all of those decks can be played in Web 2. And now, as of September, we launched the Web 3 aspects. Now all those decks can be transformed into NFTs and played as NFTs and traded and sold and, done all the things you do with true ownership. Now, that process has led to many great upsides and some downsides. The upsides of we were able to bring those players over and access a wide community of players who have never even been aware of Web3 or were just leery of it for exactly the reasons we talked about, right? A lot of rug pulls, a lot of not real games, a lot of, challenges with trust in this supposedly trustless environment. But we got a chance to bring them along for the ride, right? So when we announced that we were going to Web3, as you might expect, we got a lot of hate. We got a lot of people that review bombed our game, a lot of people that were very upset and, felt like we're very concerned. And I made it a point to be very much direct and out in front of it, right? So I did AMAs, I did spaces, we have a very active Discord. Anybody's welcome to join in. I'm very active there. My team's very active there. Thousands of people are there talking about Solforge Fusion and our other games. And I answered every question, right? And there were some that are completely misinformed, like, oh my God, you're going to destroy the planet with the energy usage of this stuff, which is crazy. It's, a Solana transaction. It is part of the reason we chose Solana, is the Solana transactions like doing a Google search, right? It's the same, very, very economical for the player and economical for the planet and energy usage. But then there were other concerns that were legitimate, right? Like, okay, well, what happens if my stuff gets stolen, right? In a classic Web 2 economy, it's protected, and the developer can just reimburse you or fix everything. In a Web3 world, not as much. And so we had to add in extra security measures and, had 2-factor authentication and some other security measures to help protect people. And so that discussion really helped to bring the community forward and make them ready for Web3. And I think that we, not only that, but also, again, I've been doing this for 20 plus years. It's not like, I'm going to run away and trying to grab a quick buck here, right? This is my career. This is my livelihood. This is not, so it helps to build trust. And it's a lifetime of building trust, not just somebody showing up and saying, hey, I'm going to make a game, trust me. And so that has helped as well. And then the last piece of this is we made sure that everybody knows this is fully optional all the way through, right? If you want to play the tabletop game and never want to touch a computer, cool, you can do that. You want to play the Web 2 game and you never want to touch tabletop, that's cool too. You want to trade Web 3 and get involved with that, right? Every piece connects and supports each other, but you're not required to be in anyone. So I think what we'll do is just show the value, and that's the best way to bring Web 2 audiences over. And that's what I think is going to be key to us, allowing us to grow. It's great game first to help people actually care and want to be there. Great community second is the key to helping people stay there. And then, just clear communication from the developers, showing that we are listening, showing that we care, and showing that it's a thing that we're going to grow together.
That's really fascinating as a journey, because I think, not many people will have probably gone through what you've described, I think, but it is almost certainly the right way to do it, and you've probably done a service to Web3 generally, into Solana, by doing this the right way, having that level of transparency and being highly hands on with your community. I think it's a really good way of approaching this kind of project. And you mentioned the kind of choice to use Solana there, and it being related to the energy and things like that. I'm kind of curious to take a step back from, okay, you've chosen Solana, but why do you think it's important that maybe blockchain had come along at this point? Like, when you were talking with Richard about, the design of the ideal card game, trading card game, deck building game, this hybrid model, did you at the time, we're talking 2011, Bitcoin's only been around for a couple of years at that point. Do you think that game, or realizing this new hybrid model, would have been possible without blockchain? Or do you think there are some kind of unique properties of what we have in Web3 that really change the game, to use for one of a better phrase, for what
Yeah.
you wanted to achieve? Is that really important to you?
Well, there were multiple technologies that had to evolve in order for this to come to fruition, right? So the algorithmic printing technology and digital deck creation, we couldn't have done that 10 years ago, let alone in 2011. That technology didn't exist back then either. And blockchain was in such a nascent phase. In fact, I've been a true believer for a while. Probably not since 2016, I'd say. For me, I really got into blockchain, and I built a blockchain game in 2018 just for fun called Block Brawlers. But the technology was so new and it was so expensive, I had to build a game where you just had minimized number of transactions on the exchange, and on the chain, and being able to, like, it was just a very restricted world, and the technology wasn't there. And so when I was, it was not a foregone conclusion that Solforge Fusion was going to be for sure on the blockchain. It was something I researched because, in reality, as a game developer, you can offer most of the services that blockchain provides, using traditional Web2 technologies. You can allow people to trade things on a server, you can manage it, but it's very expensive, both in terms of building, in terms of the legal and regulatory infrastructure, and it doesn't, it does require everybody to trust you not to just turn off your servers at some point. And so when we researched it, and we did a lot, we talked with all of the, major chains, we had a lot of layer twos we spoke with. Solana proved to be both the most cost effective and the most supportive, with the most robust community for us to launch on. Now, we do want to support multiple chains over time. In fact, we've also done an airdrop to a bunch of Ethereum accounts on games that are on Ethereum. So we are, we plan to be multi-chain, but Solana was, as a, we're a small developer, right? I've been doing this a long time, but we're not a huge team. Solana proved to be the best for us to build on. Their team, full disclosure, they also invested in our project, and so they believed in us from the beginning. We believed in them, and it's been a great, what we call ourselves, soulmates throughout the process.
So what was it? You said in 2018 you developed a simple, like, blockchain-based game. I think that the term blockchain-based games are kind of dying out because everyone's kind of, I don't know, they haven't really done so well, right? As soon as you advertise yourself as a blockchain-based game, everyone's like, oh God, this is not going to be fun to play, right? What was it initially? You talked a bit about the advantages of, like, supporting community, transparency, trustlessness, all this kind of stuff. Was there a certain thing? Was there a moment where the penny dropped and you were like, we really need to push this technology into gaming? I think there's a real value add here. Was there a certain moment you can recall?
Well, for me, I like to live on the edge of where technology can unlock new and better forms of gameplay. That's just, like, I've realized that over time. I've always been looking for the crossover between digital and physical. I have, again, Ascension was the first deck building game to come to mobile. Solforge Fusion was the first trading card game to be designed for mobile and digital. Ascension was also the first virtual reality deck building game. I wanted to be pushing. I saw what was possible with Web3, and again, I believe in the long, we could go deep down this rabbit hole, but I'm a true believer that, like, what Web3 means is it allows us to unlock new ways of building communities and growing our collective action that have never been possible before. And so my first foray into games in Web3 and a blockchain-based game was more about me getting to understand the technology and learn what's possible. And I think games are the perfect kind of, lead in this space, because, games build virtual communities and virtual economies and interactive systems, and get people to collaborate and work together, whether that's in a World of Warcraft raid or, trying to build your farm in Farmville or whatever, right? Like, people work together and collaborate to do things. And so it's a low consequences way to be able to try, what is it like if we wanted to build, in disconnected nation states or corporations that are, DAOs and everything. That the DAO wasn't even a term back then, but that concept was very front of mind. And so, I basically at that time was like, all right, let's see what I can do here. I understand the concept of a trading card game and love the idea of having cool collectibles. In this one, what if I baked a lot more into those collectibles? So they were little block brawlers. They were little like fighter characters that had different stats. You built a team of them. You matched them up against another team, and it was a somewhat more complicated rock paper scissors battle to find out what happened with them, where your stats mattered and your types of team synergies you had mattered. And so it was partially for fun, partially because I saw the value of a digital collectible object the same way I saw the value of a physical collectible card, and partially to be able to learn and grow in that space, because I do think it's the future of not just gaming, but like society and finance and the things that are really going to matter in the long term.
Well, I mean, you're totally right. Like gamers, they're pioneers, right? They're kind of like the misfits, the retrobates who like to push the boundary, willing to take risks on this stuff. And the community aspect is so important. Like, and it's an obvious kind of target market for this kind of tech stuff, which I find so exciting. It's why we try and get as many gaming people on this podcast as possible. And it's really, I love that you like to be at the bleeding edge of technology and work out, what's the value add for the game at the end of the day. Like you've talked about, say, the NFT, the idea of this like product kind of passport style for the decks, and like starting to integrate the aspects of DAO and community driven content and all this kind of stuff. What's the future for Solforge? Like outside, it can be blockchain based as well, or even outside of blockchain to the other technology kind of talked about, digital, physical, blending those two kind of realities. What does the future of Solforge look like? What are some of the big things that you want to incorporate into the game, the community?
Yeah, so I mean, we've got a lot of this stuff up on our roadmap, right? The most important part for games like this is continued content. So we just did our most recent release called The Last Winter back in June. We have another release that'll be coming out in October. We have a variety of new cards, new content, new varieties. We're moving to new platforms. So as I mentioned, we want to be multi-chain, so not just to Solana, but also be able to move to Ethereum and to other chains and be cross-compatible. We're also looking to move to mobile and be available on Apple and Android devices. And so broadening the base, continuing to create great content is part of it. And then the other thing one of the things I personally love about the game is the fact that I kind of mentioned this briefly earlier, but that we have what we call like storyline events and storyline tournaments, where players, by playing the game, can influence the world and the lore of the world, and which of the Forgeborn, which are kind of like our Jedi commander characters that you play as, that which of them becomes more dominant, and what types of effects will appear in future sets. So different cards will show up, and you get a storyline element we have writers that will write and tag it to your deck. And I think that's just so cool. And to be able to like grow the lore of the world and get people more immersed in it and feel like you really are engaged. Because again, no other game has this ability to say, no, this one of a kind deck has the story attached to it, has the lore, has the connection, and is able to influence what's going on in the future. Like, it's just a really cool space that I want to continue to build on. And there's a lot of other little features and stuff this is exactly where I think the community can help us prioritize. We want to do, more in-game tournament features and have more variety of different ways to play. I didn't even mention that you can actually we have also a single player algorithmically generated campaign inside the game. You could play totally for free. So you take your unique decks, you play in this campaign, you battle monsters, you gain XP, you get unique powers, all that stuff generated unique for you every single time you play. Being able to expand that and add more encounters and more variety and more story is all stuff I'm super excited about, because it's just super fun. And I'm basically making the game that I want to play, and hopefully there's enough people out there that want to do the same.
Yeah, it really sounds it in terms of how exciting and the possibilities that you're opening up with that, right? I think those are two really powerful concepts. The idea of user generated content, whether that be lore, whether that be kind of more design. We've seen that a lot in video games as well, with engines being opened up. We've spoken a lot about that, but also that uniqueness of experience, not just of the items you're using in the decks and having unique decks and cards, but having a unique experience. I think this is something that is going to be huge in video games generally going forward. The way AI is advanced, to be able to generate things based on your user input and become much more intelligent as you play, I think is super interesting. So on that note, taking a step back from what you're doing with Solforge, do you see this movement in Web3? You say you're kind of a full believer in Web3 now, like us, I think. Do you see this as part of a bigger shift in gaming? Because I think when we've spoken about it before, I think we see gamers, as Alex said, the pioneers. They're probably more used to the concepts and the philosophy of Web3 than almost any other demographic. So do you think this is part of that shift, and is it being kind of taken and run with by these gamers, or is it something kind of not unique to them?
Well, there's multiple facets to this, right? So I agree with you that gamers tend to be on the forefront, but I also think that gamers also can turn on you very fast, and they love to hate. So for if you look at the history of gaming, and as different business models became more dominant, there was always massive hatred that came with it, right? So when you move from a classic, I bought this game in the store, or I bought a CD or whatever, to again to age myself, or floppy disk for really age myself, I buy my game and then it's the whole game, to things like subscription models, right? Like World of Warcraft. People were like, "Oh my God, they're raking the money away from us. They're doing a terrible thing." Whereas in fact, that allowed them to create a much more immersive world than anybody before. And then when freemium games became a huge model, right, for free to play games and all of that, people were screaming in the streets because, oh, that's all try to take money from us. They're, it's pay to win, right? And people got very upset. And then that became the dominant model. And I think Web3 is another version of this, right? Where there have been some, both bad actors as well as people who were totally innocent, but, didn't deliver on their promises. And a lot of people who just tried to shoehorn Web3 into games where it didn't fit. And I think there's been a massive backlash, and in part justifiable, from the classic Web2 gaming community. And the key to making the shift, which I do believe is going to happen, is you've got to have the killer products that really show the value and create a good user experience. And in my opinion, the best way to do this is an optional on-ramping, like we're doing with Solforge Fusion. And that will allow people to kind of come into the space and start to see the value of it. Because there's no real, you can't explain it as much as you want, but it's really about showing people why this is better for them, and they'll start to see that as they say, oh, okay, no, cool, I do have real ownership of this stuff, or okay, cool, I can earn, and my I get value out of growing this community, or I have the ability to have control over the direction of this game and feel a sense of ownership that is deeper than I could get in another gaming experience. And I think as people start to see that come to life, then they will be converting over. But I think it's been a rocky road because of a lot of those hiccups along the way.
So you're testing this out right now where you have the option, right? It's optional to get on board with all this Web3 stuff. Do you think, like, based on a pure prediction, I know it's completely speculative, do you think it will be de facto? Do you think it will be the default in, say, 5 to 10 years, something like this?
Yeah, I think that in 5 to 10 years, for sure, most players who play our game will be using the Web3 elements, because again, it's just free value for you. It's just better for you. All right. And so I think the fears will go away and it will become more commonplace. Will it be the case that all games are Web3 games in 5 to 10 years? I don't think so. I think that it requires a specific kind of game, right? If I'm going to play a single purchase, play a RPG game like a Baldur's Gate 3, or, I'm going to play something that's a coherent, complete experience, I don't think I need Web3 for that. I don't know whether Web3 adds value for that. But if I'm going to play a game that does have more growth and collectible objects and things that allow more ownership of land and territory within the virtual world and expanding that, and like a Second Life kinds of things, like those kinds of games are very natural. And I believe they'll all move to Web3 because that will be better for it. And as the technology gets better, again, when I made a game in 2018, it was very cost prohibitive to do anything on chain. Now in 2024, I still can't run the whole game on chain, right? It's still like incredibly cost prohibitive to do that. We're just doing the exchanges and elements on chain. I think once you have the technology get to the point where, okay, no, it actually is economical and cost effective. And by default, the one thing I love about Web3 is so much of it is open source by default, right? So you can just build on what's available in a way that was never possible. I can't access Blizzard's code for what they're doing. I can't access a lot of the different elements in the player bases. Here, that's going to be something that I think comes by default. And so people can build on top of what already exists and access communities that already exist. And so that's going to become a natural flow for people to continue to grow and continue to move forward. So I think that we will see that trend, and many games will default to Web3 where it makes sense, but not all.
I mean, I love that the kind of the concept of user-generated content built on top of open source code that's kind of publicly available, and well, sometimes immutable, at least there anyway, in perpetuity. One of the things I remember seeing in the early days of blockchain-based gaming is the idea that every single action was a transaction on chain. So every single shot, every single movement, and some of the people like kind of doing these run-throughs of like a single movement takes 10 seconds to get confirmed on chain. I think that kind of concept is slowly dying out, thank God, and people are starting to understand that it's a lot more kind of nuanced than that, and actually under the hood typically, which I think it should be more and more. So we definitely have some game designers who listen to this podcast, and you've kind of gone through this now. You talked about some of the potential risks, but for those game designers that are trying to integrate Web3 into their games or build games based on Web3, what are the potential risks that they should be thinking about when doing this?
Yeah, so I mean, at a top line, most game designers who have played, and if you've never built in-game economies before, right, they takes a lot of attention, a lot of time, and there's a lot at stake, right? Even when you're just having a box, closed system. What are your inputs? What are your sinks? How are people getting access to your in-game currencies? What are they being spent for? How do those translate into, player enjoyment in terms of, or player power level? And how are those things balanced? And how do you manage each tier of player, like we talked about earlier, the kind of, new player, the minnows versus the whales versus the sharks, right? And how do you balance all of those things? That's really critical. And that takes a lot of experience. When you move to Web3, it's like 100x more complicated, right? Because now the tokens and the NFTs and everything you're doing are open systems. And so certain players, this is where you can get, kind of farming happening in, the Philippines, where they're going to just spend hours doing certain things, or nowadays bots and AI that you have to protect against. And, one mistake can crash your entire economy. And so the realities of building, I think you need safety valves, because nobody's figured this out yet, in my opinion. I did a lot of research on it. Nobody has like the answer. And so you need to be able to have some safety valves as you're moving through, be very thoughtful about how you build your economies, and then making sure that your game really does, that Web3 really does add value to your game, and you're not just tacking it on because you think it's going to be a quick buck or you think it's going to be better, right? What is it that you couldn't do before, or that would be worse without Web3, that you could do better with Web3? And then making sure you have some protections when it comes to how are you regulating that economy. And then from a player perspective, I think you want to make sure that you're also protecting your players, because people are not used to, especially if you're not a Web3 native, you're not used to protecting your keys and making sure that your account is locked and secured, and making sure that, once people take ownership, when I've had my Magic card collection stolen back when I was a kid too, and that sucked. They smashed in the back of my car, took my backpack, which was thousands of dollars worth of cards, and that was rough. But I had insurance, and my insurance paid out for that. So that sort of thing doesn't really exist in Web3 right now. There's not the same level of protection. So people need to be educated on the protections. You as a kind of developer need to decide what levels of support and protection you're going to offer or enforce for your player base, to make sure that they're safe and educated about what needs to happen. So those are two major elements to it. And then I think there's a lot more nuances as you have to just follow the tech as it evolves, because it's a very fast moving space, right? So which platform and which chain is the right one to move on, which tools are available that make things easier. And again, I think the biggest lesson for me is continually focusing on the user, like UI, UX, like the user experience, making it like, I don't know how many people that have played with, when you first come into Web3, it's pretty intimidating and pretty awful. It's like, I'm just, there's clearly like a lot of like hardcore developers who went down this road, and not a lot of UI, UX designers, but that's going to get better over time. But I think as a game designer, you need to think about that too. Like, what is the experience of a player who's coming in, not as deep into this as you are, and making sure that on-ramp is smooth.
It's funny. I was in the pub yesterday, and I was literally talking about this. We were like a room of people, and we're talking about our jobs and all this kind of stuff. And there was a couple of UX people, a couple of developers, a couple of like crypto people, and we were talking about, okay, how many UX people do you have in like a typical crypto firm? I was like, not many. It's all developers, pretty much typically. And they're saying, what industry should we pitch into as a new UX developer, as a new UI? I was like, crypto, because everyone knows that crypto needs more UX and more UI people. And I think the maturity is coming, but you're totally right. Like, you've hit the nail on the head there. We're saying it was always just back-end developers just stuck there, just developing things that they would assume people wanted, and very little engagement with the real world. But it is changing, I think.
Yeah, I definitely see the trends moving in the right direction. Again, we're trying to be part of the solution here, right? And I think it's just it just takes a while to catch up, and it takes a while. And I think you got to talk to the actual customers and actual players, right? Like that at the end of the day, people who are deep into Web3, just assuming that gamers are going to want Web3 because Web3 is awesome is a mistake. I think you need to be able to show them the value, actually show them the value, and have a smooth way for them. I understand when I buy something with a credit card, I understand when something's in my account, but when I have a wallet and it's different, and I can, have that be stolen, or have a different, what does it mean to work on it? Have to go to an exchange to get the token, all that stuff is stuff we're dealing with very directly, right? Because I mean, again, we airdropped our Solforge token to, you know, our communities and to other communities that are interested. But if you want to get it on that, you've got to go find it on an exchange somewhere, and there's a whole other process. So we're trying to make it clear, you know, how that works. And it's not easy to educate people right now. And as the tools get better, as the interfaces get better, all that's going to become easier. So I'm not worried about it in the long term, but as a developer who's making games and launching them right now, it's a big deal.
Yeah, I think it's really great advice, you know, for any of those game developers out there, and even just for anyone thinking about Web3 in any sphere, really. You kind of hit the nail on the head when you say when you add in Web3, it can make things 10, 100,000 times more difficult in some ways. And then you ask yourself, well, why are we doing that? Well, it's because there are some really cool benefits to be had from this. Like all the cool things that you described, you know, for most of this episode, I think they are really exciting. And provided that you have designed the game in a careful, thoughtful way, such that the, you know, the players will realize that value, they will get something better out of it than just the traditional Web2 games. And I think that's really important. But I also love, you know, bringing it back to how you have this kind of optional system right now. I think that's really important, right? Making sure you're never forcing people down that path. You want them to kind of discover it organically. So I think, yeah, that's a really nice way to kind of maybe close the book on gaming itself. And just as we come to the close, I really want to ask you, you know, completely, you know, throwing gaming out the window just for the ending here, and looking more to the future. Is there anything that you're really excited about in Web3 that isn't in gaming, right? Just it could be anything, could be in any sphere at all, any application, you know, any use case, or maybe you're just kind of a Bitcoin maxi under the hood. I don't know. What is it that gets you out of bed when you think about Web3 other than your game?
No, to me, like, you know, governance in a broader sense is what I'm very excited about, right? I believe that there's, you know, that we've sort of joked about, you know, it's just like, you know, how you lead a society. And I think that democracy is, you know, is a terrible form of government, but it's the best we found so far. I think that the ability to have, you know, variations of some people call like liquid democracy, where there's abilities to have people have access to the rights to vote and have access to the ability to, you know, throw extra currency towards things that you want. I can imagine I can have weighted vote systems based on, you know, every citizen gets 100 tokens per quarter to be able to assign to projects that they care about, and the collective will can now actually be assigned in ways that are way deeper and way more empowering than before, right? There's a million different ways to do this, but right now we have centralized systems that are inefficient, many of which were designed hundreds of years ago, that require, that make it so that most people in America don't vote at all, right? And that and people, that the ability to have people's voices be heard, the ability to have a more efficient way to distribute resources and to be able to kind of cull the best of what people are interested in, and the kind of collective will, just like we try to do in things like, you know, the stock market and how we allot resources in venture capital. I think being able to allot collective will and allot governance in ways that are not possible or have not been possible before is something that Web3 can really unlock in a way that's, again, where trust is critically important, right? I mean, gaming, in one sense, trust is, yeah, it's helpful, but like most people didn't have a problem trusting game companies because our interests are all aligned, right? The game companies just want you to pay them money and give you a good time, and you want to pay them money and have a good time, right? But when you're talking about governance and like a distribution of resources globally, like that's a big deal, and there's a lot of reason for people to be bad actors, and we've had to have a lot of inefficiencies. So to me, there's this ability to create collaborative communities that are deeper and richer and more decentralized is something I'm very passionate about, and I think can really change the world for the better.
I love that. I think a lot of the narrative has kind of been dominated by AI's role in gaming going forward. And I'm really glad that you think it's maybe as much, if not more, decentralized governance and empowering individuals to participate in the community. Could I get your really short take on AI's impact on gaming at large?
Yeah. So if you want a slightly longer impact, I have an episode of my podcast called Think Like a Game Designer, where I talk to Ethan Mollick, who's one of the foremost experts on AI. Just wrote a book called Co-Intelligence, and we go deep into all of this stuff. But I'll give you my short version. I think it is we are currently in what I would call a golden age, which is AI. If you're good at your job, it is a way to empower you in ways that were never possible before. I can do so much more now without, you know, requiring other resources than I ever could. I believe in the long term, how much that plays out and how that value is distributed, and what happens when AI, if it does, gets better than all of us at everything that we do, then what I'll tell you is I'm an optimist by default. So there are nightmare scenarios here, but I'll tell you my optimistic scenario is that actually gaming becomes more important than ever, because in a world where our economic value cannot be we can't really contribute economic value to the world, right? Imagining AI is better than us at everything. What we do is we're going to have, in theory, a world of plenty, but we're still going to want ways to challenge ourselves and to compete and compare, because that's just built into our nature. And the best way to do that is games, right? Sports. We just had the Olympics recently, and you can run way faster if you have like a motorized vehicle, but that's not the game. The game is we're going to put you in a box and play that game the same way I'm going to play a game like Fortnite. I'm going to play a game like Solforge Fusion. And so I think the best case scenario future world of AI is where we have a world of abundance, because AI can provide those resources for us, and we create games and spaces of play for us to compete and connect and find value in ways that were, previously considered frivolous, but will now become the center of our existence as we figure out what it means to have value and be human.
I love that. Well, let's definitely end on that note. So we're coming to the closing section now. I've learned a lot. I've had a lot of fun during this episode, so thank you very much for that. In the closing section, we tend to ask 2 questions across all our guests to see like how answers vary and things like this across time and across industries and all this kind of stuff. Typically, we ask, what is Web3 to you in 1 sentence? But earlier, you actually did do a perfect 1-sentence answer, so I'm not going to repeat that question, and we'll probably just copy and paste it here because it was so good, and I was like, we need to save that little clip bite. So the second question I want to come to is, if you could choose anyone on the planet, throughout history or even fictional, to sit down and discuss Web3 with, who would it be and why? And I thought you might go with Richard Garfield, but you've already done that, so well, maybe someone else.
Yeah, that's not fair. I get that one for free, so I wouldn't pick that. I kind of, my first answer, it feels like it might be a cliched answer, but I'm going to go with it because it's my first answer. So I think Elon Musk would be at the top of my list. I think he has pushed an enormous amount of innovation across a variety of fields. I think he's danced as very pro crypto and danced back from the edge some. And I would really want to know, with where he's taking, the X platform, with how he's building he obviously built PayPal, or was part of the team that built PayPal. I think he would have the deepest insights in terms of like how it can currently empower communication and financial technology. And I think, despite several things that maybe we might disagree with about him and some of his trolling nature, I do think he wants to do good for the world at his core. And I would love to sort of see how he feels about it today and how it integrates with the kind of frontier of technology. So that's my answer.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one, because he does seem to be, sometimes the darling, sometimes the devil of Web3 and crypto. But yeah, there are elements that do seem like, he really gets a lot of the philosophy, when you're talking about micropayments for articles and things on X. I think, yeah, that's a really great choice. And by the way, it's just so ironic, the one time someone gives us a perfect 1-sentence answer to that question, we didn't even ask for it. You just offered it up straight away. So maybe that's the key. We don't ask that one in the future. But listen, it's been such a great episode. I've really, really enjoyed this and learned a whole lot from it. For anyone who wants to learn more about Justin and Solforge, we'll definitely link his profile and the Git book that you mentioned in the show notes. And all remains to say is, to everyone listening at home, thank you very much for listening, and you can join us next time on Untangling Web3.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Untangling Web3.
Don't forget to send us your thoughts, questions, and comments on social media, and be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast provider to catch the next episode. See you next time to untangle a little bit more of Web3.
The views we express here are our own and do not reflect the views of our employers.